product provided by Nintendo for Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. We have broken down the Xenoblade Genesis trailer extensively, but there's one key element we haven't really touched upon yet, and it is here where mankind would learn that the vengeance of a fallen god had yet to be fulfilled. What does this mean? What is the vengeance? Who is the fallen god? Well, in today's video, let's see if we can narrow things down and possibly call the future of Xenoblade Genesis. Hello everybody, it's your boy Jmulls, and we have a lot to talk about. Now, there's an important asterisk we have to put in front of everything we're about to talk about. We are operating off of previous Xeno knowledge and the trailer for Genesis, which is about 2.5 minutes. We don't have much to work with here, especially considering this line just comes out of left field. Like, really, when we think about it, take a step back and view this analytically. This entire final bit, and it is here where mankind would learn that the vengeance of a fallen god had yet to be fulfilled. This comes out of nowhere. It's just some weird narrator dude just yapping on at the end of the trailer before they do the title drop of Xenoblade Genesis right here. And he just drops that pearl of wisdom like a hot potato. Here you go, just hold on to it. So all guesswork and theory work is going to be heavily volatile, but I do think we can narrow it down a lot. Let's start with the candidates from Xenoblade itself, but also the people that I think it's not going to be. I think we can write off Zanza very quickly. Now, I can understand why a lot of people would naturally gravitate to someone like Zanza, because being this divine figure is kind of his whole spiel back in Xenoblade 1. We definitely fell the dude, so why do I believe it's not Zanza? Well, it's the same reason why I don't believe that it's Klaus, Malo/Logos, or Malthus, and also Onto/Alpha. Okay, a little bit less so for Malthus, but I just think there's too strong of a connection to Klaus. We have finished what is known as the Klaus Saga, Klaus arc, whatever. I think the story involving Klaus is done, and I don't think they're just going to bring something like him back, or something overly related to that guy back, because I do think they want to move on to something else. I don't think they want to trace every story from here on right back to Klaus like you could with Xenoblade, up to this point, with the exception of X a bit. I just don't think that's what they want to do narratively. So I think it's for those reasons we can largely discount characters that have a very large and upfront connection to Klaus. For Malthus, you could argue he's a little bit less so connected, even though he did get the Numa and Logos Core Crystal. I just don't think they're going to bring that character back. I mean, again, they could if they really want to. I just don't think that's going to be the card they pull. There's really two entities in Xenogears to me that could possibly fit this bill, but I also wanted to scout them right now. That being Deus and also the Wave Existence. This thing's really hard to understand if you haven't played Xenogears, so don't really worry about it too much right now, because I don't think it's either Deus or the Wave Existence. And it's for a very simple reason. We've talked about a lot about Perfect Works, which is like this grand timeline of events for the story they wanted to tell for Xenogears. And Xenogears itself as a video game is episode 5 of Perfect Works. Well, Xenoblade Genesis itself is rather interesting because we see Genesis in Perfect Works. That is for episode 2 over there, Time of the Genesis. So while things like Deus and the Wave Existence would be in play for like a Perfect Works set in episode 2, the reason I'm not overly convinced it's one of those two entities is because they specify Fallen God. You could maybe make the argument you could consider the Wave Existence to be a Fallen God, because in the context of the story for Xenogears, it is trapped in the Xenogears version of the Zohar, where Xenogears also plays in this concept a lot. There's this whole scene in Xenogears where the protagonist, Fei Fong Wong here, meets the Wave Existence. And the Wave Existence is basically saying, I am trapped in the Zohar. I was basically plucked from a higher dimension, and I'm now trapped in the Zohar. TLDR, by the way, for this entire, like, lore drop of a cutscene. And Fei even goes, I mean, looking at this thing, Fei just goes, God, is that you? And then the Wave Existence just basically rebuttals saying, you know, some may refer to me as that. Xeno and Xenoblade are no strangers to the concept of Gnosticism, and the Wave Existence is basically the highest rung that is explored in Xenogears. And the Wave Existence basically says, look, some are going to refer to me as God, but I am not a god. In their perspective, it may be appropriate to say that I'm a god, but I'm also not. So why do I think then, whether you could consider it to be Deus or the Wave Existence of Xenogears, why do I think it's not likely to be either of those? Very specific reason. reason. Square Enix, Monolith don't own the rights to Xenogears. So I think if they're going to retell the story of Perfect Works, what I think they're going to do is have to make their own version of Deus or the wave existence going forward if this is the direction they want to go in. At the same time, I'm just not sure how likely it is that the fallen god and the vengeance of a fallen god we are seemingly going to have to actively deal with in Xenoblade Genesis. I'm not convinced that is supposed to refer to Deus or the wave existence, or the new version of either Deus or the wave existence that they might incorporate in the story going forward. I'm not convinced that it's referring to them right now for the context of Xenoblade Genesis' story. So let's put a pin in the wave existence for now, where maybe at some point in the future that idea is brought up again, and as we get more information we can have a better grasp on whether or not they might be referring to the wave existence or some wave existence like entity they're going to incorporate in the story going forward from here on out. Now, there are 4 characters from Xenosaga I think we need to talk about. Albedo, Wilhelm, Chaos, and I'll leave the 4th for later. Let's start with Albedo Pizza Roll. I just don't think it's him. He was never really positioned to be a character that's a godlike entity to begin with, but he was a major antagonist in Xenosaga, so I think it's only appropriate to talk about him. He kind of falls under the Amalthus umbrella to me, where he's not really a character to me that feels positioned to be brought back in such a prominent role going forward, as like the vengeance of a fallen god. Like if it was just an Albedo reference the entire time, that would come out of left field. People that are only experienced with Xenoblade would have no idea who the heck this jabroni is. I just don't think it's particularly likely. Massive spoilers for Xenosaga ahead. I have to talk about them when we're talking about Chaos. So who the heck is Belt Supreme? Well, he kind of falls under a similar role in the story of Xenosaga as Alvis did in Xenoblade 1. He's not the same entity or anything like that, but he operates on a similar way to where Alvis is very mysterious for a lot of Xenoblade, and then it's revealed, oh, he is Monado. Oh, he's like stands above even Zanza. When it comes to Chaos, for most of Xenosaga, we know there's something weird and something larger going on with this dude. We just don't know what that is. He has a level of proficiency against one of the chief antagonistic forces in Xenosaga called the Gnosis that not many others have, if anyone. And it turns out at like the end of Xenosaga episode 3, it's revealed. So yeah, you know that guy you've been palling around with in all of Xenosaga? He was a disciple of actual Jesus. Like, that's not a metaphor or an analogy or anything. That's just Jesus Christ in Xenosaga. Chaos is right there. Like, he's right here. You can also think of him as like this universal failsafe. He possesses, or at least at one time possessed, the power of anima. So you can think of him like the vessel of anima, right? Now, isn't that intriguing? You know, anima, vessel, I'm just saying, right? We don't need to do a deep dive on him right here, because I don't think the vengeance of a fallen god is referring to Chaos for a very specific reason. He's not God. He was never really an antagonist at all. He was kind of the bro. He was one of the main party members in Xenosaga, and he also came in clutch at the very end. So it's like, I just don't feel that the vengeance of a fallen god is referring to our actual bro, unless they want to give this dude like an alpha arc like in Xenoblade 3 Future Redeemed with like Alvis. I don't think that's going to be the route they go down. I mean, they could, don't get me wrong, I just don't think that's going to be the route they go down. We do go back to the main asterisk at the beginning of this video where it's like, we only have one trailer to work with. They could write whatever they want going forward, and it really does feel as if this trailer for Xenoblade Genesis was carefully curated to show us very specific pieces of information and also not show us a lot of other stuff. Now, for someone that I think it maybe could be is Wilhelm. I would still lean towards saying it's probably not him, but not as strongly as I would a lot of the other candidates that we've discussed throughout this video. Now, who is Wilhelm? That's a really good question. We don't even really know. He's kind of the grand manipulator of Xenosaga. He has his finger in nearly every pie. You can see like from his various aliases here: Cardinal, Lord, Your Eminence, Head of Hyams Group, the CEO of Vector Industries. We will get back to that one. He's kind of the dude everything almost goes back to in Xenosaga, and for an entire game series it was all about, okay, you thought you understood everything, but now there's a whole other layer. He's like the highest layer. You know that one guy when you used to bring him over to play games who would always hit the reset button on the console? That's basically the role he played, but for the entire universe. There's this entire concept called called like eternal recurrence. And Wilhelm was essentially the guy in charge of making sure that when the universe got to a certain point, it just got reset back to zero. No, not like that. And with Xenoblade really leaning into the Xenosaga elements just more and more as the games go on, even to the point of just like straight up addressing elements from Xenosaga by name. Vector Industries, Dmitri Yuriev, essentially bringing back like the beach where you go to when you're about to die and the MC needs to yap at you. In Xenosaga, they basically just brought that back for Xenoblade X. Again, they truly are not subtle about the Xenosaga stuff. And you could argue maybe the world of Anshaw, the world of Xenoblade Genesis, might be egg-shaped. Maybe it's not a sphere, maybe it's not a cylinder exactly. Maybe the reason that the curvature of Anshaw looks kind of weird and bizarre is because it's in the shape of an egg. And maybe it's supposed to represent the birth of a whole new universe, and somehow, despite us beating, Wilhelm at the end of Xenosaga, dude found a way. And maybe even if Wilhelm himself isn't a god, to our perspective, and the perspective of the people of Xenoblade, you could consider Wilhelm to have like this godlike air about him, as someone in charge of eternal recurrence, resetting the universe after a certain point, or after certain conditions are fulfilled. Maybe at the end of Xenosaga, and to the point to where Xenoblade Genesis takes place, Wilhelm found a way to come back, and now we have to deal with the vengeance of the fallen god. I think it's possible. I wouldn't say it's particularly likely, because can you imagine how confused Xenoblade onlys are going to be if Wilhelm of Xenosaga just randomly shows up one day? They could absolutely elaborate on that character in the context of Xenoblade. He's one of those characters where it feels like we know a lot about him from Xenosaga, but at the same time, we know basically nothing. So if you just reintroduce him as a character in Xenoblade Genesis and as an antagonist, I think there's a world that exists where you can reintroduce a character like Wilhelm, and with the way that he is written, again, theoretically, you make it feel rewarding for people that have played Xenosaga, but not completely out there, or just allow a whole bunch of people that have only played Xenoblade to feel overly confused. I think there's a world where they can pull it off. Do I think that's the world we're in right now? Not particularly, but I don't think it's out of the question. It'd be a lot simpler if they would just actually name drop a character from Xenosaga in Xenoblade, especially one that you could maybe like argue has this godlike presence about him, or depending upon your perspective, has a godlike role to play in the story. It would be so much simpler if we just had a name drop of a character like that from Xenosaga in Xenoblade. But that hasn't happened, right?
Dmitri Yuriev.
So who is Dmitri Yuriev? Well, he's one of the main antagonists of Xenosaga. We don't see too much of him until the third game, but that is where we have a big confrontation with him. And his ultimate goal, his big objective, is to become a god. And while you could argue he got kinda close in Xenosaga, maybe in between episode 3 of Xenosaga and whatever the heck Xenoblade Genesis is on the timeline, just like wherever that thing ends up being, maybe it is trying to refer to Dmitri Yuriev here. Again, I'm not overly sold on this idea. However, Dmitri Yuriev is a character you could reintroduce in Xenoblade and give Xenoblade only some understanding of who this character is. But Jmulls, isn't that unlikely? Why would they ever just bring back some dude from Xenosaga? They're under a completely different company. Clearly they would never do this. Except in Xenoblade 3 Future Redeemed, they name drop Dmitri Yuriev. They're not subtle about it. They don't try to be wink wink, nudge nudge, or anything. They just straight up spell his name out and say it from the radio broadcast. I just want to reiterate, this is something that I've been talking about ever since Future Redeemed. They didn't have to do this. It wasn't just happenstance or a happy little accident that they just happened to throw in Dmitri Yuriev into Future Redeemed. Like freaking whoops! Like that doesn't happen. Clearly they cannot let go of Xenosaga. I like that because Xenosaga's awesome, but they clearly can't let go of it. And seemingly in every new version of Xenoblade that we get, they just reinforce those connections to Xenosaga even more. So the reason I will say, out of all the characters from Xenosaga, the reason I believe Dmitri Yuriev possibly being the most likely candidate for the fallen god, that or Wilhelm, is because they already brought the dude into the lore. before. And it's not like it's unreasonable that they couldn't bring Dmitri Yuriev back. To cut a long story short, dude's lived a long time. Not like Wilhelm, we think, but he is also a shapeshifter. If they really wanted to, they could bring him back if they were able to, which they clearly are because of Future Redeemed. But at the end of it all, after all of that, even then, I don't think Dmitri Yuriev is the most likely candidate to be the fallen god being talked about here. I would say the odds of it being Dmitri are greater than 0, but I wouldn't really say that they're high. I think some more likely candidates for who this fallen god is may be found in Xenoblade Chronicles X. Xenoblade 3 brought an end to the Klaus arc, but after that, they decided to go back to Xenoblade X for Xenoblade X Definitive Edition, where they added a whole bunch of new story. To me, I think the best idea, in order to gain an understanding of where the future of the story is going to go, will come from both Xenoblade 3 and also Xenoblade X. There's already a few elements of Ansha, the world of Xenoblade Genesis, that seem eerily reminiscent to areas and locations and set pieces we can find in Xenoblade X. We've gone over these before. Like these rings over here look a lot like Silverloom. This game really has only had one major lava zone, that being Cauldros, and the color palette up in this little like volcanic island looks rather similar to Cauldros. Obviously it's not 1-for-1 or anything like that. That one's a bit more of a stretch, but still, as a data point to take into consideration alongside the Silverloom rings over there does beg the question. We've talked about a few other elements as well, but to me, when it comes to Xenoblade X, there are 4 main candidates. Okay, it's mainly 3 because I don't really think Luxor's making a comeback. Look, I love my thick-tailed goat over there, but still, he doesn't feel like a villain that's going to be a throughput villain. He was just kind of there for Xenoblade X. Now we're down to 3, 2 of which I think are very likely, and then 1 is a wild card. Let's rip the band-aid off Void. Void was the big bad, the final villain of Xenoblade X Definitive Edition, at least of the ones we fought with gameplay. And for all the people that suffered under Void and his machinations, yeah, I think you could say some people viewed him to be a god. I mean, Luxor and a lot of the Ganglion called him the Great One. This dude got glazed like no tomorrow because of Luxor. Now, as to who Void is, like Al says here, he was a born citizen of Samar, which is this very ancient empire that one day just kind of blinked into our universe and then became arguably one of the most dominant forces in the history of our universe, again, within the context of the Xenoblade story. They were very important and very influential, basically the forerunners from Halo, but for Xenoblade. And Void was the one who studied the conduit, and he was also the one who put the power of the conduit into the cores of the Ares. As someone who was such a genius to be able to manipulate the conduit to such a degree that many in the Xenoblade verse view to be this godlike entity all of its own, the ultimate matter, the conduit. Based on some people's perspective in universe, you could say some people would call Void a god. We definitely beat his ass in Xenoblade X. I mean, we had the whole spiel of him like realizing, yeah, we just killed the guy, and him finally learning what it felt like to die. It's not that out there to me that in the next mainline entry, right after we did that, because remember, Chapter 13 was a new edition for Definitive Edition. It wasn't there in the original Wii U version. Okay, my camera can actually pick it up here. Yeah, it wasn't here in the Xenoblade X of the Wii U. That was added for Definitive Edition. That was the story they chose to tell between Future Redeemed and Genesis. Could it be nothing? Yeah, it could be nothing. But in a game where we're already on the lookout for more Xenoblade X comparisons and references, because the MC just has, and a lot of other characters, just have the ears you find on ancient Samarians and Samarian descendants, on top of the other Xenoblade X references that we have found throughout this trailer. Would it be that big of a surprise if the fallen god being referenced here was Void? The number 6 is also a number very closely associated with Void, by the way. You had the 6 spears that greatly reduced his power. As death as a penalty was an anathema to the Sumerians, Void's consciousness was restrained by 6 spears in hopes that his mind would gradually atrophy until his essence expired. Not only did we have the 6 spears, we had the 6 cores of the Ares, and now we have the 6 suns. Now, we've theorized for a little bit here that maybe these suns have some connection connection to the Ares cores themselves. Probably not the spears, let's be fair here, but are the chances zero? Again, we only have one trailer, so no, the chances aren't zero. And if there ends up being some kind of connection between Xenoblade Genesis and Void, I'll say it, I won't be surprised. Oh yeah, Z. I feel Z is a very self-contained character to Xenoblade 3's main campaign. I don't really see them bringing him back. Maybe they could explore some kind of connection between Z and also Void from Xenoblade X, but I feel like that would be the extent of it. I really don't feel like the Fallen God would be Z. So before we get to the really crazy one, let's talk about the Ghosts of Xenoblade X. Now, the Ghosts were one of the two factions that had their big battle over Earth that resulted in the destruction of Earth and the subsequent universe. We really interacted with the Ghosts a lot in Chapter 13. They were largely absent from Chapters 1 through 12. In fact, one of the major story beats of Chapter 13 is that we have to essentially build the White Whale 2 and do our own Project Exodus all over again because we cannot overcome the onslaught that are the Ghosts. We just can't do it. We can't escape these dematerialization events by remaining on Mirror. They're going to wipe out the world. We have to jump ship, go to a whole different universe, which is one of the main reasons we have to go back to Void in order to get back the Ares core crystals, because we needed those things in order to jump to a new universe to begin with. And I really wouldn't be surprised if at some point in the future we have to interact with the Ghosts all over again. I've theorized before, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people have at this point, that the Gnosis from Xenosaga and the Ghosts are either directly related, like they're the one and the same thing, or they are very much related, but are still somehow different. I know it sounds kind of outlandish, but funnily enough, when you go back through Xenosaga 1, that game kind of addresses a lot of the discrepancies that exist between the Gnosis and the Ghosts, like even down to how they look different. And the only thing that gives me pause that the vengeance of a fallen god might be referring to the Ghosts is that fallen bit. We haven't really ever seen the Ghosts lose. It's even established in Chapter 13 and that in that battle over the Earth, the Ghosts were winning that. The Ganglion were on the back foot. It just, the battle was so large, and with the way those forces fight, the universe was just cooked to begin with. And like the stars aligned, which allowed us on Project Exodus on the White Whale to jump to the universe that Mira was in. It wasn't something humanity consciously did. We just won with a stroke of luck there, that we're able to escape and get away. But in every encounter with the Ghosts so far, we may push them back for a little bit, but it's never for long, and we never end up winning the war. When Elma's people went to war with the Ganglion because the Ganglion were invading, it wasn't looking too hot for them, but when the Ghosts showed up, it was all over. So when you have a faction that is written in such a way to basically be unbeatable right now, or at least, maybe they can be beaten in the future in a more permanent way, but right now they're like undefeated. So what's the fallen bit for them, right? Funnily enough, this could relate back to the Gnosis lore of Xenosaga. I'll TLDR this. When that person dies, that person's consciousness begins to be drawn and swallowed into the collective unconsciousness. Usually a person may initially fear this process, but this initial fear isn't enough to resist being drawn into the collective unconsciousness. A gnosis happens when a consciousness's fear is strong enough to reject the unification with the collective unconsciousness, instead remaining separate. The further they withdraw from the collective unconsciousness's gravity, the more they transform into gnosis. And if, as we theorize, that there is a strong connection, if they aren't the same thing, between the Gnosis of Xenosaga, this right here, and the Ghosts of Xenoblade X, then you could account for the fallen bit with the lore we have for the Gnosis. One little hangup, and maybe this is just a consequence of trying to translate from Japanese to English here. This is singular. If we go off the lore we just talked about for the Gnosis and possibly the Ghosts, this would have to be plural, unless we don't know everything about the hierarchy of the Ghosts, and maybe there is some kind of like godlike entity at the top of that totem pole, and maybe that's what this is referring to. That is a massive assumption, kind of sounds like something Monolith may do, but it doesn't particularly fall back into line with established Gnosis lore so far. There would have to be a great big new addition. They're entirely within their right to do that, by the way. Not saying that it's not possible. It's entirely possible. It's just at this juncture, without additional information, we can't say for certain. I think one of the main reasons that I'm giving so much attention and time to the Ghosts here is because after Xenoblade X, it really does feel like the whole lore with the Ghosts is something ripe for expansion, something they're gonna maybe sit on for a bit, or maybe just partway through the game. They just feel inevitable. They feel inevitable that they're going to be brought back into the story and that we're going to expand on them. Maybe it'll be in Xenoblade Genesis, maybe it'll be in a game down the line. They just feel like, almost like Chekhov's gun, where they're just sitting there and we're waiting for them to pick it back up, because they were by no means wrapped up with X, let alone Definitive Edition. Time will tell for them. Yeah, I got you. This turned out to be a fan theory video. But this one is so fascinating, I think we need to address it here. We have Daimon 2027, who says, I have my personal crackpot theory concerning this fallen god. It could be El Saruf. After all, his name is an anagram of Lucifer and can be translated as the light bringer or morning star. We're talking about El from Xenoblade X. Yeah, the guy that sounds like Maximilian Pegasus. Yeah, that guy. And for those who forgot, the Xenoblade X art book features several designs of him looking quite demonic. While nothing is concrete, you could definitely imagine a scenario where he is this god. Something like this. El was an evil god imprisoned on Mira, possibly by the ancient Sumerians. When we met, he realized we were their descendants. He then decided to play the role of a goofy alien to dupe us, hoping that when we eventually escaped, he would too. Following, of course I messed up the screenshot. Following the end of chapter 13, we'll go with that, he is now free to enact his revenge. Maybe the only way to stop him was to seal him away once again. In order to do this, Origin and or Ares were used to turn the new Earth into a hollow Earth to serve as his prison. Perhaps he is the yellow sun at the center, and the blue suns are the seals. There may have originally been 6 blue suns, but due to an insufficient amount of anima being sent into the city or the sky, one disappeared. Now that the seal is weakening, the ceremony we see is being used to stabilize the remaining ones or even recreate this lost sun. I think we can all agree it would be absolutely crazy if they took this actual, what insult do I use for him? Yu-Gi-Oh wannabe, this like comedic relief made flesh before us, and they turned him into one of the most important characters in the entire verse. That would be crazy. However, the reason I wanted to include this in this video, there are parts to this that make sense. Xenoblade has taken plenty of characters who we thought at one point were done and we would never really see again, and just brought them back into a major role. They love doing this, actually. It's one of their favorite things to do. And the character of El is so weird, even in the original version of Xenoblade X, even all the way back then, this goober is one of the most unique party members. Because to me, I haven't done every side quest in Xenoblade X, but I don't remember ever seeing another dude looking like El Saruf. Supposedly, he's a native of Mira. Never seen this dude a day before in my life, or at least his people. But he just joins up with us, is perfectly capable of piloting a skill, by the way, and we also interact with him quite a bit during chapter 13. Remember in Volataris when we had to go get all the different party members and get them back into the fold? That dude was just camping out in the White Whale too. By far had like the most unique hiding spot. Is that particularly relevant? Not really, but to me, it highlights they are willing to make sure, even in chapter 13, the new stuff, to separate El and make him feel unique compared to everyone else. Will that amount to anything? We don't know. Interesting to think about though. Bro, thank God for the fandom page, because I'd have to go looking for the concept art myself. Oh, thank God. And besides his washboard abs and like Wicked Witch of the West boots he has on, bro, look at this concept art of him. He looks like he'd be any other Xenoblade antagonist. Funnily enough, actually, when you look at him, look at the hair. Like it changes color to be a little bit more purple as you get down to the tips. Yeah, you know who else it kind of reminds me of? Just something interesting to think about, you know? El initial concept artwork. What in the hell am I looking at? Someone get this dude back to the Wizard of Oz. That's the straw man. Bro, why is his waist that snatched? Why is he wearing a tree stump? Who is this little guy flying right next to him? Why didn't he make the cut into the game? Where can I get this drip? Okay, El Saruf, we see the fit. I get it. I see the vision. I'm not gonna lie to you. I look at this concept art for this guy, and like maybe his story changed during development, and originally he was supposed to be way more important. His design gives off like main character energy, or like this dude is going to be important. What the hell is this? How have I never seen this art before? Alright, so you know what I just said about him being like a main character at some point? Brother, what am I looking at? Oh, this design is awesome. Monolith, you have to find a way to bring this back. This guy looks awesome. Oh, hell yeah. I need more of that. He looks like he'd be a boss fight in Final Fantasy 14 or something. Also, this is definitely a stretch on my part, and for me, that's saying something. I'm just saying, right? Like, if you were blind, I think you could see a connection here. And that's the kind of leaps of logic I need to have more around here. So, like, early game, when they were just, like, prototyping this game, they had no idea how they wanted this dude to look, huh? They were just spitballing whatever, just throwing things at the wall. This is my swamp. What am I looking at? I did not need to see his O-face today, not gonna lie to you. The other part that I just keep going back to is the fact he's called El Saruf. It's like, yeah, that's a very close connection to Lucifer. Vengeance of a Fallen God. This game being called Xenoblade freaking Genesis of all things, like the Book of Genesis. Elma quoted Revelations in Xenoblade X. If they want a Lucifer-esque character going forward, I guess you could just use El. Sure. I think of all the things we've talked about today, I started out the most unsure with this one, but I think I'm completely sold on it. Not in terms of it being likely or anything, but this, in my opinion, is the one that I kind of hope it is, because I think there's a lot of interesting things that could be done with that character, and a lot of scenes could possibly be completely recontextualized in Xenoblade X if we understand this dude's supposed to be Lucifer. Heck, they might mean that literally. I mean, after all, this series has Jesus Christ as a straight up character. No analogy, no metaphor, just he was there. The same with Mary Magdalene. Like, heck, again, Xenosaga spoilers incoming. Mary Magdalene's on the box. Like, yeah, that's just kos-mos. That's also one of the big plot twists of Xenosaga. Though they also do the whole story where it's like, at this point, kos-mos is her own separate entity and not just the Mary Magdalene of old. They go in that whole spiel as well. And that Telos is the body of Mary Magdalene. But you get what I mean. I definitely underestimated how long this video was going to become, but there's few things that I enjoy more than theorycrafting about the future of Xenoblade. So here's where you come in. I need your help. I need to theorycraft more. I got one channel to work with here, come on! I need your hottest theories. I need them off the presses, ready for my, reading in a video pleasure. I need you to swing for the fences. I need you to pick that trailer apart, piece by piece, pixel by pixel if you have to. I want your wildest, craziest theories, your Hail Mary attempts at predicting the future of the Xenoblade Genesis story. Leave them in the comments and I may react to them in a future video. While you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And you may have heard the news, PlayStation are killing physical games, and gaming may never be the same. And legit, that might not be an exaggeration. You want to find out more and get up to date with what's going on and how this could affect you? Check out this video right here for more. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye, everybody. Until we meet again.